Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tom Isitt, and I'm here to talk to you about the Italian front of the First World War. It's become a bit of an obsession of mine over the last couple of years. What drew me to it originally was my grandfather's war service. He served in the 48th Division throughout the First World War, and the last year of the war he spent on the Italian front. So that kind of got me interested in doing a bit of research. I decided that, having read quite a lot about it, that I would go and have a look. And a week having a look has turned into, I think, 5 or 6 weeks so far. And it's one of the more remarkable aspects of the First World War. So, Italy initially didn't join the war in 1914. They sat on the sidelines and waited to see what happened. They were approached by the Austrians, who they were currently allies with promises of new territory. They were also approached by the Allies with promises of new territory. And in May 1915, the Italians joined the war on the side of the British and the French, and declared war on their previous partners and neighbors, Austria-Hungary. At the time, I don't know whether you can see here, but the black border, that is the political border that separated Austria-Hungary from Italy. The Austrians, quite wisely, when war was declared, withdrew to more defensible military border. So they gave up a bit of land in favor of having a more defensible line. Italy was desperate for more land, not only around the Adriatic, but they also wanted new territories in Africa. They were empire building, and so it suited them to join with the Allies. They offered better deal, if you like. The commanders on the Italian side was Luigi Cadorna, and on the Austrian side, it was Konrad von Hotzendorf. The main areas of conflict were on the eastern side, on the Isonzo, which we can see here. My travels on the Italian front were primarily by bicycle, and the red lines mark the route of my journey from Trieste on the Adriatic to the Stelvio border, the Stelvio Pass on the Swiss border. As you can see, the red lines don't always go near the blue line, which is the front, and also the front moved in 1917, so I then had to go back on my bike and ride the Piave sector. As you can see from this bit at the bottom, I cycled 1,500 kilometers and climbed some pretty massive mountains for a total altitude gain of 41,000 meters. I'm not a super fit person. I am 60 years old and determined. So that's how I managed to do that. It was sheer strength of will rather than any innate ability. Most of my journeying was done by bicycle, 935 miles. I also walked 166 miles along the front, rode a horse for 9 miles along the front, climbed nearly 75,000 feet up mountains. This particular picture here is the scariest thing I've ever done. More about that later. And for the few bits that I couldn't reach by climbing, I have a drone which I sent up to take pictures. So, almost all of the serious fighting on the Italian front happened along the Isonzo Valley, the Isonzo River, or nowadays it's called the Socha. It's this blue thing that runs up here. This is realistically the only place where the Italians stood a chance of breaking through the mountains. The Vipaco Valley and the coastal plain both led to Trieste, and that was a very significant target for the Italians. So when they mobilized, the Italians crept towards the border at a snail's pace. If they got a move on, they probably could have broken through, because the Austro-Hungarian lines here in red were very sparsely manned and mostly manned by elderly reservists. However, the Italians took so long to get to the Isonzo that by the time they got there, reinforcements had arrived, and the Austrians were very well dug in. When I say Austrians, I mean Austro-Hungarians, and that could mean anyone from somebody actually from Austria to somebody from the Czech Republic or from Slovenia, all over the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and they all served here in a sort of mishmash of units. When the Italians arrived, the Austrians had set up several main defensive positions: Sebusi, San Michele, Podgora, Sabatino, and 383. These were well defended mountaintop positions, and the Italians spent pretty much a year trying to break through this. It wasn't until the middle of 1916 that they finally got over the mountains or the hills at Sabatino and Podgora. And as you can see on this map, they advanced by October 17, barely 8 miles from where they started. At the end of October, the 12th Battle of the Isonzo, there had been 11 up to that point. The 12th battle, also known as Caporetto, then wound up this front, and the Italians retreated in chaos westwards. Oh God, writing. Don't bother reading this. Very quickly, Isonzo's 1 to 5, no significant gains, 300,000 casualties, no movement. The 6th Isonzo, the Italians actually managed to cross the Isonzo. They took Gorizia and parts of the western Carso, 93,000 casualties, a small Italian victory. Isonzo 7 to 9, basically the same battle, but it was split up for reasons we don't really understand. Again, stalemate. The 10th Isonzo, by this point, the Austrians were reeling from lack of manpower, lack of munitions, lack of food. The blockade that the Allies had in place was seriously affecting the Austro-Hungarian military. The 11th Isonzo was a stalemate, but by this point, the Austrians were in such dire straits that the Germans realized they had to step in, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire would collapse. So the Germans sent a few divisions to the Italian front, and on October the 24th, 1917, the Austro-Germans attacked across the Isonzo and forced a 70-mile retreat by the Italians. Okay, that's the serious history done. The lower Isonzo is defined really by the Carso plateau, which is round about 500 to 1,000 feet above sea level. It is dry limestone plateau with very little vegetation and no natural water. So as you can see, if a high explosive shell lands amongst that lot, not only do you have the stuff from the shell flying about, but you also have tens of thousands of shards of rock flying in all directions. There's one example where a bloke was killed by a piece of rock from an explosion from a shell that landed a kilometre away from him. So, you know, this stuff was absolutely terrible to fight on. It was also very hot in the summer and freezing cold in the winter. These days, it looks like this. It's a bit like Verdun. They planted a lot of trees and shrubs across it after the war was over, and pretty much left it as it is. During the war, it looked like this. As you can see, very little vegetation, just as the saying goes, a howling wilderness of stones, an appalling place to fight. Best part of 150, 200,000 people died on this plateau in the fighting over the 28 months. These are the Italian positions very near the coast, right at the south end of the front. Very much still in place. All of this stuff is still there. I mean, obviously somebody's put a ladder up, but these positions are to be found all along the Italian front. Wherever you go on your bike, there's another trench, more positions. And because this land was virtually worthless, nobody cleared it properly. I mean, they took away the corpses and the shells, but nobody cleared it properly, and it's all mostly still there. Couple of period shots. On the left, we've got Austrians with a flamethrower clearing out a position on the Carso, and on the right, a very typical trench. The topsoil was generally only 8-10 inches deep, and then you got down to bare rock. So either trenches had to be dug, or more often the case, they were built up, rather like dry stone walls. One of the key points of the Western Carso was Monte San Michele. These are Austrian works. They dug huge tunnels and positioned a lot of artillery in these tunnels. Took the Italians over a year to capture these positions. And the Austrians did the classic thing, which was just withdraw to the next lot of positions. So, you know, the Italians had to do it all again. Still quite a lot to see on the Western Carso. As you can see here, there's a tunnel that's now blocked off. You can't get through it. But all along this front, they dug tunnels through hillsides from the reserve trenches through to the front line trenches. This is a 149 howitzer, 6-inch howitzer, standard Italian design make, made by Ansaldo. A little along from Monte San Michele is Redipuglia, which is a huge, well, you can see it's a memorial, an ossuary for over 100,000 burials. I think 40,000 of them are identified, the rest are unidentified. A lot of people hate this place because it has very fascist kind of look to it, but I find it quite moving. The word presente is what a soldier would say when his name was called at roll call. So the endless repetition of presente all the way up the monument, I find very moving, actually. But yes, in order to make this, they basically went round all the battlefield cemeteries at the time and dug up everybody and moved them here. And in doing that, they mislaid a lot of paperwork. So people who originally had a named grave ended up as an unknown at this site. And I think that's heartbreaking for the families. But it's a hell of a place. The middle Isonzo, as you can see, the line ran along this row of hills here and then up north to the upper Isonzo. Gorizia was a town behind the Austrian lines for over a year, It held no real strategic value. So when the Italians broke across in 1916, the Austrians just simply withdrew to the next line of defences. San Marco was kind of the middle of that. But this valley was guarded all the way down on both sides by artillery. These are the hills typical of the Middle Isonzo at Podgora and Oslavia. Yeah, horrible, horrible scenes of terrible frontal attacks. The Italians had learned nothing from the Western Front, so their artillery and infantry were completely independent of each other. So endless frontal attacks just ended up in carnage and bloodshed. Nowadays, they grow very nice, they make very nice wine up there. The Oslavia Memorial is one of several on the Isonzo, 58,000 buried here, again collected from cemeteries all around this area. This gives a very good idea of the sort of terrain that that the Italians were attacking up. The Italians are always in blue on my maps, the Azzurri, and the Austrians are in red. The Austrians held this ridge top, and the Italians attacked up it over and over and over again. I mean, it's 40 degrees maybe. None of those trees were there, so it was bare rock and boulders. It's not a cathedral, it's a basilica of St. Mary that was absolutely flattened. In the end, the Italians took Monte Santo, but they never got to take Mont San Gabriele, and that was the last gasp for the Austrians on this part of the front. The white X here marks a place where an English chap, Geoffrey Winthrop Young, he ran an ambulance outfit, a volunteer ambulance outfit, and he was blown up by a shell on this road and lost a leg. Subsequent to that, he had to hop for 16 miles during the retreat from Caporetto on a pair of crutches. So yeah, the English were here. Hugh Dalton and his artillery battery were just over here as well. So we had lent some support to the Italians during 1916. This is basically the photo is taken from the remains of that basilica looking along the front line. All the vegetation gone, tens of thousands of dead. And another of the problems here, without any topsoil, there was no way to bury people. So you had corpses strewn everywhere. You might possibly be able to throw a couple of corpses in a shell hole and cover them in rocks, but the chances are they would probably reappear again before too long. The stink was unbelievable by all accounts. This picture on the left is all that remains of that Basilica of St. Mary. It's subsequently been rebuilt, but that was what it looked like at the end of 1918. We should talk a bit about the artillery. The Italians had some fantastic artillery. Look at this 305 here, absolutely brilliant. This was very much a battle of artillery. They just pounded the living daylights out of each other. And there was a lot of pretty heavy artillery, including a couple of 420s. I think one of them was deployed at Liège to reduce the forts there before being transferred back to Austria-Hungary. But wherever you go on the front, you find enormous bits of exploded shell. I've got some bits of a 280. You know, it is everywhere, and these things did appalling damage. You know, you can imagine what a high explosive from one of these landing amongst a load of rocks does. It's just horrendous. Yeah, Mont Saint Gabriel on the left. As you can see, nowhere to bury the corpses, so they just lay there. Mont Saint Gabriele is quite interesting in that it was Austria's last hope in September 1917. The Italians came as close as they ever did to breaking through. And the only troops the Austrians had left were a battalion of Landsturm. They were elderly reservists, and these were Czech ones. And the Czechs had a terrible reputation in the First World War because a Czech battalion on the Eastern Front defected en masse to the Russians. So it actually didn't happen like that, but there was a perception the Czechs were hopeless. But they were all that the Austrians had left, and they held Mont Saint Gabriel for 4 days until help arrived, and the Italians never took it. The upper Isonzo, it gets quite mountainy up here. This is a view from almost the top of Monte Crun. Looking over that mountain there is Monte Matajur. We'll come to that later. We've got Caporetto down here. The Italians held all of these mountains. The Austrians held all of these mountains. The Italians tried quite hard to take them, but as you can see, that's not territory conducive to mass frontal attacks. From a map point of view, Montenero's here, also known as Monte Crun, and the front line ran all the way here across Monte Rombon and north to the Carnic Alps. It was terrible territory. Nobody stood a chance of breaking through here. I mean, even if you penetrated the lines, you know, where are you going to go, and how are you going to move enough troops to make it worthwhile? But that didn't stop the Italians from taking Montenero. They tried to attack up this slope on numerous occasions, failed completely. So they sent a unit of Alpini troops, and they climbed up this almost sheer face and took the summit. It's that distance is pretty much the equivalent of El Capitan in Yosemite Valley. I don't know if any of you know that, but that's 3,000 feet of climbing. They did it in the dark without their shoes on. They took it, but it did no good because it's just one mountain peak in a long row of mountain peaks. So they had the Austrians either side of them, and nobody was going anywhere. This is the view from the top of Monte Rosso, from Montenero, looking at where the Austrians withdrew to when they were booted off Montenero. There's quite a funny story concerning these two mountains. In 1916, the Italians dug an enormous tunnel down here through and under Monte Rosso. They then packed the chamber with, we don't know how many tons of explosives, but a fair amount, and then waited for the say-so to explode the mine. In the meantime, Austrian tunnelers broke into the Italian tunnel, and they stole all the explosives. So when the Italians pushed the button, precisely nothing happened. These are contemporary shots of these mountain ridges. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff up there, but nobody is going anywhere. It's more a battle of survival against the elements than against the enemy. Okay, on the left we have a map of the Upper Isonzo and the movement of Austro-German troops on October the 22nd. That was the Battle of Caporetto. The Germans broke through from behind Mengor Hill. They used infiltration tactics. Rommel was one of the people in this group here with the Württemberg Mountain Battalion. He slipped through the first two lines, captured the second line, and then headed for Matajur. He was supposed to get a blue max for taking that, but they actually gave it to somebody else. So Rommel was extremely pissed off, and he then took off west to try and capture the Fourth Army, and we'll look at that a bit later. On this side, we've got the Isonzo, very, very narrow at Caporetto, very easy to cross, yeah, the German divisions at Beauvais used gas to devastating effect. They broke through the line and rolled it up, and as a result, the entire Italian second and third armies further south were obliged to retreat. Colivrat Ridge, these are Italian third line positions. They were all sitting there during Caporetto wondering what was going on, and then Rommel turned up and took them all prisoner. They thought they were 3 or 4 miles behind the front line. Turns out they weren't. Part of the Italians' problem was that the general in charge of this sector, Capello, was very offensively minded, so he kept all his artillery nice and near the front lines, with the inevitable effect that they all got captured. This is the Upper Isonzo, absolutely beautiful place. I can recommend swimming in this river, although it's only about 5 degrees, so brace yourselves. As you can see, Monte Rombon completely dominated this valley. But the Austro-Germans realized that it doesn't matter really whether the Italians hold Rombon or not. If you put a big enough force through this valley, it will succeed. And that's what happened in October 17. Again, another view up from near Rombon, looking down at the valley. You know, you can see anything moving down there. North of Rombon, the front reaches the Carnic Alps and runs basically along the ridge of the Alps all the way along here. There were 4 mountain passes, Nassfeld, Plocken Pass, Viola, and Kreuzberg Pass. Again, the problem was if you did break through either way, you don't have enough reserve troops to make any use of those breakthroughs, but that didn't stop them all from knocking the hell out of each other from time to time in battles along this front. This one here, the Kreuzberg Pass, is interesting because in May 1915, this pass was held by 1,000 reservists. They were Stanschützen and Landsturm. So these guys were in their late 30s to 70s. Some of them were in their 70s. There were 1,000 of them, and they had 2 artillery pieces. If the Italians had advanced with any kind of oomph and put a couple of battalions behind them, they could have broken through, and then they would have been into the Austrian hinterland, and they could have won the war in the first 2 weeks if they had attacked that point with any kind of gusto. But the Italians didn't know the strength of what they were facing, so they tiptoed up to the front line, by which time it was too late and the inevitable stalemates occurred. Oh, sorry. This is the Carnic Alps. This is what they look like. They are pretty wild, pretty sparsely populated. They're about 50 miles long and about 5 miles across. And as you can imagine, if you hold those heights, things like resupply are very, very difficult. So we're going to talk a bit about logistics. I'm a bit of a logistics dweeb. I hope you'll forgive me spending a couple of minutes on this. Obviously, fighting on solid rock the whole time meant you needed drills. You know, pickaxe is not going to get you very far. So pneumatic drills were used extensively by both sides. This picture, top left, is of a compressed air factory, basically, that the Italians built. it supplied a 50-kilometer network of mains compressed air, and you can still see the pipes. They're still there today. These would have carried compressed air. And if you were in a drilling team like these guys here, you would latch on to a valve or something. I don't know. I'm not really an engineer, but you know that these things could run up to 50 drills at any given time. And to build something like that for 50 kilometers around a mountain is frankly extraordinary. The teleferica or cable car was a very universally used device to get stuff up to the front lines. Obviously, this one's carrying an artillery barrel. Some of them were quite small and hand winched. Others were, like this one in the middle, absolutely enormous. They could shift several hundred tons of provisions and ammunition a day without any trouble. And there were, I think, overall 2,300 kilometers of cable car systems throughout the front. Transport was also an issue. Obviously, the horses and mules did a lot of work. They had enormous tractors towing these artillery pieces. One of my favorite quotes from this front is by the guy who ran one of the sectors in the Carnic Alps, and they employed the portatrici carnici. That's these ladies here. There were about 1,000 of them, and they were paid to carry munitions and supplies from the valleys up to the frontline positions in these enormous wicker baskets. They generally carried between 50 and 70 pounds in weight on each trip, and they would usually make 2 or 3 trips a day, usually climbing about 1,000 meters at a time. So they basically carried these things 3,000 meters up a mountain during the course of the day. They got paid a pittance for it. As you can see, they knitted while they walked, making socks, I think, that one. They got sniped at, and one very famous one, Maria Mentil, she was killed by an Austrian sniper while carrying munitions up to the front line. The guy who ran this sector said, "The women of Carnia are treated the same way as any other useful animal." He was terribly proud of the way, the brilliant way they treated the women. On a slightly less humorous note, the women in after Caporetto in the Veneto area, they had a horrendous time being occupied by the Austrians, and we'll find a bit more about that later. The dogs, a lot of these dogs came from Canada. They imported hundreds and hundreds of them from Canada, and they were used extensively at the higher altitudes. Okay, Montecellon. Yeah, this is the Austrian front line. There's a diary of a bloke who spent 50 consecutive days hiding on this ridge here while being fired at from the top of Montecellon by the Italians. 50 days. Yeah, that's pretty grim. They did dig a tunnel up through the mountain so that they could get troops up there, and here I am in that tunnel. It's about 200 meters long, and it rises at 45 degrees and brings you out here, which is the top of Montecellon. It's a very tough climb, the scariest climb I've ever done, but when you get up there, it's just extraordinary. There you go, above the clouds, pretty near the top of the Cellon. And when you look down, you can see a Kleiner Pal, which is a battlefield at the Plocken Pass. This is an Austrian forward observation post, still there. God knows how they got it up there. That's 8,000 feet above sea level. But yeah, incredible. And as you can see from this drone photo, the trenches were very substantial. These browny red bits, that's all barbed wire that's still kicking around, waiting to give you tetanus. An extraordinary battlefield, which was covered in snow for 8 months of the year. The people who fought up here are interesting. Mostly on the Carnic front, they were on the Austrian side, the Standschützen. So these guys are in their 50s, 60s, some of them in their 70s, or they were under 18 years of old. And in fact, we've got some boy soldiers here. Two Schützen here, brothers. The older one was killed in action. The other one was severely injured. This bloke here is interesting, Victor Savs. He was fought with distinction, got several medals for bravery, was severely wounded and taken off to hospital. When they cut his uniform off, they found that Victor was actually Victoria, an 18-year-old girl. She'd signed up with her father. Her CO knew, but nobody else. And she fought for several years on the front line. And this was the front line in the Carnic Alps. We've got an Austrian position here overlooking the Sexton Dolomites. Beautiful, but very inhospitable. On the right, we have the highest cemetery of the First World War. I forget exactly how high that is. 8,000 feet, 7 burials in there. And it is literally 4 hours walk from anywhere. Across the valley from the Carnic Alps, we have the Sexton Dolomites, which was madness on so many levels. The Sexton Rotwand was this damn great thing here. The Austrians were at the top. The Italians were on these ledges beneath. The distance between the positions was measured in vertical meters rather than horizontal meters. And often they were only 30 or 40 meters apart. Hellishly cold, got down to -42 one night in that valley. Nowadays, it's, well, I went there week before last. Stunning, absolutely stunning. The Austrians were up here, the Italians were up here on Undici. The Italians snuck down, climbed up this, along there, and positioned themselves in these gullies around the Rotwand, or Croda Rossa, as the Italians call it. They had tried a frontal infantry assault up this pass. Needless to say, that achieved absolutely nothing. The thing on the right is a trench map, believe it or not, and it's a trench map of the picture on the left. I can't make head nor tail of it. I defy anyone to make head nor tail of it, because what you see on the ground is so different to what you see on a map. It is almost impossible to reconcile the two. But whoever is on top of the Rotwand has this view of the Camelico Valley, and as a result, they can control artillery and completely dominate it. And that's what the Austrians did. That's Austria there, by the way. And on the right is my youngest son, who came with me on the latest trip, snowshoeing in the Dolomites, and he's demonstrating just how hard it is to make progress through conditions in the high mountains. This is more Dolomites. You can see a path running here along the back of this rock face. This was the reverse slope of the Italian front line, and these pathways are called via ferratas. You probably can't see, but there's a plank over that enormous chasm. And that's how they moved around. Mostly they were paths with just a rope handhold. Sometimes they were metal ladders, all sorts. And the troops were expected to use these throughout the winter as well as in the summer. The dotted lines show you the routes of the via ferratas. You can see a position there. And this is quite an interesting position. I don't know whether this is a machine gun or an artillery position, but we'll see this again in a moment. As you can see, one slip when you're clambering around on this and you're several hundred feet down the mountain, and hundreds of people were killed in falls. These are modern day via ferratas. That's me arsing about on one on the Chelon. As you can see, you wear a climbing harness and you're clipped to a pair of lanyards, that carabiners that clip over the wire. So in theory, it's impossible to fall off. It doesn't stop you getting seriously hurt if you do fall off, but it should save your life. And this is kind of mountain climbing for those of us who don't really do mountain climbing. These are more positions on the Monte Paterno. On the left is a big tunnel dug by the Alpini from Monte Paterno to the Toblino Noffen. Everywhere on this front has at least two names, an Italian name and a German name, which is the source of endless confusion. In that tunnel there you can see out through various windows, and what you see on the left here is the Trecime de Lavorado, and what you see on the right are searchlights, and that's one of the interesting things about this front. It was covered in searchlights, and they had a big one on the top of this thing here. They had to haul it 1,600 feet from the bottom to the top, but they had a 90 centimeter oxyacetylene searchlight there, which completely dominated the plane. Yes, the little lookout that we saw on the other picture, that's the other side of it. And as you can see, a machine gun or an artillery piece positioned there commands, well, pretty much the whole of this valley. One of the more extraordinary stories from this front concerns an Austrian mountain guide called Sepp Innerkofler. He was part of the Standschützen, and he led a patrol up this face of Monte Paterno because the Italians were dug in at the top. He got up to the top and fought hand to hand with an Italian Alpini. The Alpini threw him off. And he died. You can see here on the right-hand picture, after the war, they went and retrieved his body from the top of Monte Paterno and took him back to his hometown to be buried. I climbed up there and stood pretty much where Innerkofler and De Luca stood and fought, and poor old Innerkofler ended up down there. We climbed up the south side, which is a rather easier climb than Sepp did, but it was still a challenging day. Again, there's my son, Harry, who is a much better climber than I am. Moving a few miles to the southwest, we come to the Lagazoy sector. This is near Cortina. And it's extraordinary. It's all still up there. There's still miles of barbed wire, trenches, unexploded munitions, you name it, it's up there. Please ignore the little numbers in the corner you might see sometimes. That's just so that I can find out where I am in my notes. The unique thing about the Lagazoy was that the Italians occupied a ridge, not a ridge, that they occupied this ledge here called the Martini Ledge, and the Austrians were vertically above them in the amphitheatro. The Italians dug a tunnel up here and exploded a mine to get rid of the Austrians who were there. The Austrians would lower people down to attack the Italians on the ledge below. Like this, Italians throwing grappling irons up to try and haul down an Austrian machine gunner. Then the Austrians are lowered down on ropes to throw grenades at the Alpini. I mean, this stuff is just mental. I mean, what a way to carry on a war. It's extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. These are some pictures from week before last in the Dolomites. This central picture shows the mine tunnels that were dug, Italians in red, Austrians in blue on this occasion. But you can see reconstructed huts and machine gun positions, and realize just how cold and hard it would have been for fighting in this area. This is a picture of the Castelletto, which is a very famous place. That was Austrian controlled. This big mountain here was Italian controlled. So the Italians dug a 400-meter tunnel through this mountain under the Castelletto, and then set off a huge mine, which basically blew the saddle to pieces. There were then 3 days of hand-to-hand fighting in this crater and in this area before the Italians finally took the Castelletto. This is a picture taken from within the mine crater, Tofani on the right, Castelletto on the left. And this is exactly as it was left. There's still bits of shrapnel and metal and all sorts lying around. Another couple of miles further to the southwest, we have more mine warfare. The Italians needed to take the Col de Lana, and they tried to take it up this slope here. Obviously, you know, a frontal attack up a 45, 50-degree slope against machine guns is never going to work. So eventually they dug a tunnel through the mountain, laid a mine, 5-ton mine here, and exploded it. And this is the crater that it caused. And obviously that all collapsed down the side of the mountain. The Austrians lost a few people, but the rest of them withdrew along this ridge here to Montesif. These are reconstructed trenches you can see along the ridge top there. Having exploded a mine there, and the Austrians having withdrawn to Montesif, the Italians blew another mine on the ridge. That didn't work. And to prevent any more mining, the Austrians buried a 45-ton mine on the ridge and blew it, basically destroying the ridge and making Montesif impregnable. And there they sat until Caporetto happened and the Italians withdrew. Around 10,000 people died fighting for this mountain for absolutely no progress whatsoever. Another couple of miles further down the road is the Marmolada, which is a huge glacier. It was controlled mostly by the Austrians. The Italians were on this corner. The Austrians dug an ice tunnel. Well, they dug an ice city here and then dug tunnels up to their positions on the ridge in the middle of a moving glacier. Incredible feat. Here you can see some pictures of it at the time. That's a bridge spanning a crevasse in the glacier. This was the ice city, or at least if you shave the top 10 meters off the glacier, that's what the ice city looked at. And it had barracks. It would accommodate about 200 people comfortably, or 400 or 500 people at a squash. Extraordinary feat of engineering by the Austrians. And within a couple of years of the end of the war, it had all slid down the mountain and vanished. Again, bridges across crevasses within the glacier, and the barracks were built of planks. Planks were actually one of the most important things about this front. The Fourth Army had 60 sawmills in their sector, and they produced 30,000 planks every day. Yeah, extraordinary logistical achievement. Some of those planks are still there. These are Italian bunks on the Punta Serrata at the top of the Marmolada. These were bunk beds. They're still rotting merrily away. Yeah, extraordinary place. Again, moving a bit more to the southwest, we have the San Pellegrino Pass. This picture was taken pretty much in no man's land, looking towards the Italian lines that were on this ridge. The beauty of this front is just, it's mind-blowing. Costabella Ridge was bisected by the front line, so the Italians held one end of the ridge, the Austrians held the other, and this was the front line pretty much on this picture on the right-hand side. You can see here that a tunnel gives out onto carved set of steps that go all the way up to the front line. There's a couple of climbers coming down. It's now a via ferrata. But up there's all this stuff, caverns. This one in the middle is a machine gun position, third line position. That's me looking towards the Austrian end of the ridge. One of the slightly unsettling things is you still find quite a lot of human bones on these battlefields. They were properly cleared at the end of the war officially, but there's still a lot up there. After the war, they paid the locals, I think it was 10 lira per corpse that they recovered. So people went up specifically to recover corpses, and it was not unknown for them to, I believe the word is disarticulate some of the skeletons so that they could claim they'd found 2 people rather than 1. But the people who lived in these areas were absolutely penniless, destitute. Sorry. So yeah, pretty tough. Again, further along, another couple of miles away, is the twin peaks of Monte Colbricon, or at least not quite twin anymore. The Italians took this one on the left, dug a big tunnel down, and underneath the Austrians on the right-hand side, exploded a mine and took the top off the mountain. Again, it achieved nothing. The Austrians just withdrew to the next peak, and off they went again. An interesting example of how mines don't always work is this one on Busa dell'Oro, which is near Colbricon on the edge of the Lagorai sector. This was an Italian tunnel. The Austrians were on top of this ridge here. The Italians blew their mine, but it clearly coincided with some kind of fault in the rock. So all it did was open up a rip about 30 meters long and a couple of meters wide, and didn't disturb anyone. That's me coming out of a tunnel up there. Should have worn a helmet, banged my head many times, and should have worn a head torch, couldn't see a thing. However, outside the tunnel, the beauty of this landscape is just defies belief. I mean, imagine that being your front line. It's just mad. A little further along, Monte Coriol, more mining, more explosives, more. The Italians took this side, the Austrians sat there. Inevitable stalemate. These are Italian Alpini clearing the snow on their part of the mountain. All of this was going on while the Isonzo was happening over in the east. One of the few offensive things that the Austrians did was called the Strafe expedition. This was designed to break out from the Trentino area, which is all this lot here, and get onto the flat plains of the Veneto. If the Austrians had got down onto the plains, they could have cut off the two Italian armies on the Isonzo and probably won the war. They got very close, but they didn't quite make it, either here in the Astico or the Brenta. If they got into either of those valleys, it would have been game over for the Italians, but they never quite made it, mostly because just after this action started, the Brusilov offensives happened on the Eastern Front, and the Austrians were obliged to withdraw troops to go and fight on the Eastern Front. So this came close, but didn't make it. This is one of the places that guards the plains. Monte Cimone on the left, that was held by the Italians. The Austrians undermined it, blew the top off this, so the Italians just withdrew to the next mountain, and nothing ever changed. The Molette Massif, it's somewhere nobody ever goes on the Italian front. I've been there twice and never seen a single other person there. It was vital in stopping, for the Italians, in stopping the Austrians getting to the Brenta Valley. And this brings us to a really interesting place. This is Milletta. The Italian trenches were held by the Sassari Brigade. They were Sardinians, sorry. They were Sardinians. They were unusual because Italian units were mixed from all over the country, but nobody could understand a word that a Sardinian said. So they had their own brigade, and they were also the most decorated Italian unit, the Sassari Brigade. Down the bottom of the hill, we have the 2nd Bosniak Regiment, who were the most decorated Austro-Hungarian unit on this front. So we have two elite units facing each other. The Bosnians, they were notorious. They fought wearing fezzes. Everybody was terrified of the Bosniaks, with good reason. They were incredibly good fighters. And yeah, very, very highly decorated. The Sassari Brigade managed to hold on to these trenches. So the Strafe expedition turned out to be a bit of a failure for the Austrians. But here you can see a brilliant demonstration of, we've got the frontline trenches here, communication trenches running across the top. There are also tunnels dug beneath here. Then we've got reserve line trenches there. Also up here is a Bosniak cemetery where there are, I think, 208 Bosnians buried. They have these, well, really quite interesting headstones. Next to the Molette Massif is Monte Zerbio, which overlooks the Asiago plateau. In June 1918, the British had arrived to help out after Caporetto, and the 23rd Division were up on this hill. The 48th Division, including my grandfather, were up here, and the Austrians were dug in on the top of Zerbio. Very deep trenches, very well constructed. They had a much better time of it than the British and the French. Granezza Cemetery on the Alto Piano near Asiago. I had to stop and say hi to Edward Britton, brother of Vera Britton. He was famously killed up here. Possibly he committed suicide. Nobody really knows whether he got himself shot on purpose or not, but he was facing a court-martial for homosexuality, so he was very conflicted young man. Near here also is Monte Ortegara, which was the, oh my goodness, look at the time. That was the graveyard of the Alpini. Terrible fighting went on there. Yeah, all of Italy's best troops got killed. A lot of Italy's best troops got killed for no reason on this mountain. Absolutely brutal conditions. Very quickly, I know I'm running over, sorry about this, people. Caporetto, the front line withdrew to the Piave River, and the Italians lost 45,000 dead and wounded, 270,000 men captured, a lot of artillery and mortars. It all was a terrible disaster for the Italians. Morale had absolutely collapsed, and they just, yeah. Once they were back on Italian soil, these are pictures from the retreat from Caporetto. Once the Italians were on Italian soil again, morale stiffened and they fought back. They formed a strong front line on the Piave River. And then the Brits arrived. Here they are, plucky Brits. 5 divisions were sent, 2 were subsequently sent home. But yeah, the Brits fought both on the Piave and on the Alto Piano. I think these are on the Alto Piano, these are the Piave. And the Brits, yeah, Brits and French put in a shift, helped stiffen the Italian morale. And subsequently, June 1918, the Austrians, their last throw of the dice was attack across the Piave. It didn't work. And for the Austrians, that was pretty much the last throw of the dice. They were starving, they were running out of men and ammunition. And they never got across the Piave. That's a very big river, as you can see. And it's also still spanned by pontoon bridges 100 years later. That was how they got across during the war, and that's how people get across now. Monte Grappa now became a focus on this front. My favorite soldier there is Peter Pan. He gets more flowers than anybody else. And there are 22,000 people buried here, of which only 11% are identified. So that's a lot of unknowns. The Grappa Massif is covered in trenches, barbed wire. It's all still there. You can poke around to your heart's content. The Piave, on the other hand, has been cleared. It's useful industrial land, and so it has returned more to normal. But there are still Commonwealth war graves, places to visit, machine gun posts, and down here is the French memorial Pederoba. Gordon MacLean shot down on his first combat mission over the Piave. He was only 18 years old, bless him. 100 years later, the vineyard owners dug up his dog tags, so they built a really nice memorial to him. The final battle of the Italian front was Vittorio Veneto, and it was pretty much a walkover. The fight had gone out of the Austrians by this point. They were starving, they low on ammo, low on men. It was all just falling to pieces. So 3 British divisions took part in that, and it was brought an end to the war. But before that, let's have a quick look at the Adamello section. Montepasubio was very important. It blocked the Austrians' gateway to the plains. One of the defining features is a road of 52 tunnels, which was built by the Austrian Army engineers, including this incredible helical tunnel up through a rock peak. That's a LiDAR picture showing the complicated nature of these roads that they built, and they are just incredible. This is the Vesubio battlefield. Endless mining went on here. You can see the mine tunnels under this lot. Absolutely extraordinary. 10 mines exploded. The very last one was exploded by the Austrians down here. That was 50 tons of explosives, and that effectively brought an end to the mining because the whole area became hopelessly unstable. Yeah, there's me and the boy climbing up things, climbing down things, lots of tunnels. You can pretty much go where you like, although some of it's quite dangerous, so you do have to be a bit careful. The final bit, the very high part of the front, was up on the Adamello and Ortler sector. This required a whole new wardrobe and kit list compared to most battlefield tours. This was a very extreme battlefield tour. Started off beautifully down in the valley and works its way up to over 3,000 meters on the Adamello. It was beautiful, but deadly. And thousands of people died of cold, of avalanches, being shot, falling down crevasses, you name it, it happened. This is a very famous gun called the Hippo. It was dragged up there. Took 200 men 76 days to drag it across that glacier behind and position it on this ridge. They fired it a handful of times, and then at the end of the war, they just left it there. And there it still sits. Evidence also here of, I think that's a 75 mil shrapnel round. It was as tough up here as anywhere else, but they also had the weather to contend with. Yeah, still walkways, still high positions. There's my son climbing up to a lookout position there. And the slopes are still covered in barbed wire. Yeah, no one's cleared it. It's all still there. Finally, we get to the very northernmost part, the Ortler sector. This cannon here is the highest artillery piece of the First World War. That's at 3,950 meters on the Ortler. Tre Cannoni is where there are 3 captured Italian howitzers that the Austrians used. You've got to do some serious climbing and crossing of glaciers to get to this, but it's just stunning. And obviously nobody bothered to take those home at the end of the war, so there they sit. This was the front line for most of the war. Italians on Zebru, Austrians on Ortler. There's me heading off up Monte Zebru. I didn't get to the top because I'm too old and knackered, but we got a fair way up. This on the right is part of the winding gear for a cable car. Again, too heavy for anyone to salvage. These are the guys who fought up there, winter clothing. They're a very tough breed, those that survived it. The guys on the right were actually on the receiving end of shots fired from the Hippo cannon that we saw earlier. Inevitably, avalanches killed a lot of people. People disappeared into crevasses, and they continue to pop out even nowadays. You quite often read reports of more bodies appearing from the fronts of glaciers. An interesting part of this front were the ice tunnels. These are marked in blue and red. They dug tunnels through moving glaciers to escape from the shelling and the machine gun fire. This is quite a nice picture on the left of the main Italian tunnel. And obviously it's not there now because the glaciers have retreated. But the big tunnels, they could even have a narrow gauge railway of sorts. It was probably just a wagon on wheels pushed manually. But that's how big these things were. Most of the tunnels have gone. In fact, they thought all of them had gone until I made a significant archaeological discovery when I discovered this tunnel. You can see on the original map, it's marked, and it still appears to be there. That's a Google Maps picture, and it very clearly shows something in the shape of a question mark. I've named it the Isitt Stollen because I found it. I tried to get up there. The closest I got was the ridge above, very steep descent down, so I wasn't going to do that. But it's ripe for exploring. Somebody needs to go up there and see what's left in that tunnel. One of the things I loved about walking and climbing the Italian front is staying in these mountain refugios, which are delightful and in the most extraordinary places. This one actually predates the First World War, and as you can see there, it was used as an Italian headquarters. More glaciers, more mountains, very hard work. This one here is interesting. The Austrians held that much, the Italians held that corner of Zerbru, and then the Austrians held this, and they would fight at 3,500 meters. People fell down here, people were shot, artillery fired up, completely bonkers. I was desperate to get to the top of the Koenig Spitz because there's a World War I hut still up there in the ice, but it's above my capabilities, so I had to forego that particular privilege. But you know, that's still there 100 years later. This is pretty much the end of the Italian front. That's looking from the Austrian side above the Stelvio towards the front line. And that's pretty much my trip. People often ask me, what books do I recommend? I recommend these. And I will also be writing my own book at some point. So watch out for that in due course. I'm so sorry I've run over massively. I tried to keep it as quick as possible, but I failed dismally. I think we're going to do a Q&A if Simon's got the strength for it. Thank you for your attention, and apologies again for blathering on.
I sat there with my mouth wide open throughout most of that. The photography was stunning, both the original photography and the photographs you took. Amazing stuff.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to take a rubbish picture when you're in places like that. You know.
Stunning. So, but we've got a lot of questions. So, first one up, Gordon. Go for it, Gordon.
Thank you, Peter. Excellent, fabulous. That if they made a film out of that, they wouldn't believe it, would they?
That's true. That's very true.
Italy was offered quite a considerable chunk of land round Trento, Trieste, and the South Tyrol, which will allow them to consolidate the Alpine frontier around Gorizia,
yes,
Istria, and northern Dalmatia.
Yeah.
And that was then to induce them to fight on our side, on the side of the Allies.
Yeah.
What were the the Austrians offering for them to not to renege on the Triple Alliance, which they did agreed to?
Well, pretty much similar stuff. They weren't about to hand over Trieste because that was their only deep water port. And they weren't about to hand over Trento, but they were going to offer parts of the Istria and the Dalmatian coast.
So it was a Dutch auction, this then?
It pretty much was, yeah. And of course, the Brits and the French reneged on all of the deals at the end anyway.
Well, they always did. They did in the Middle East as well. I wonder where would it have gone had they joined the Austro-Hungarian army? Very
difficult to know. I mean,
yes.
Lloyd George.
A hell of a difference on the Western Front, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the Eastern.
Yeah, yeah. And Lloyd George always said that the best way of winning the war was through Italy and knocking Austria out of the war rather than Germany.
Yeah, because it kept them fully occupied.
Yep.
Right,
good. Thank you for your question.
No, and thank you for your lecture. It was excellent. Thank you.
Thanks, Gordon. Jeffrey, do you want to unmute?
Yep, I'm unmuted. Yeah, absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm fortunate in that my Italian tutor comes from Bassano di Grappa, so I've heard quite a lot about the place and seen it. The question was, sent me links to various videos about it, things like that. My question was, in a sense, a fairly simple one, which was Cadorna actually the worst C of any army in the war?
No, von Hotzendorf. He was worse. He was stupider. He learned even fewer lessons. He started the whole thing against the Serbs. He was a blithering idiot of the highest order. I mean, Cadorna was close, but Cadorna was correct in some of his assumptions in that if he had kept battering away at the Isonzo, eventually the Austrians would have collapsed. But no, I mean, Cadorna, he had no idea about linking artillery to infantry tactics. He didn't learn a thing from the Western Front that had been going on for over a year, or nearly a year before. So, yeah, Cadorna was pretty bad.
It's that wonderful quote from him about, what was it, the superior officer is always right.
Yep.
Especially when he's wrong.
Exactly that. And he fired more than 250 generals.
Yeah, you rate Hotzendorf even worse.
I personally think Hotzendorf was worse, but
yeah. But given that he was doing most of it to impress his mistress, yes.
Exactly that. He didn't have his eye on the ball all the time, that's for sure. Thank you for your question.
Thanks for that. Thank you. Let me read one or two out while I try and bring others up.
Okay.
So Leonard Maver asks, and I tried to bring you up, Leonard, sorry. Leonard says, can you confirm the name of the nearest international airport and what options there are to see the locations you've mentioned tonight?
It's exactly something I should have already said. Okay, so if you want to visit the Isonzo, Venice Airport is about half an hour's drive from there, so it's really close. You could actually do a day trip to the Isonzo battlefields if you felt like it. Further afield, you're looking at flying to Milan, probably, if you're interested in the very high mountains. When I was in the Carnic Alps, I flew to Salzburg. So there are options. Salzburg, Innsbruck, Milan and Venice will all get you to some part of the Italian front. I recommend driving there and spending a month.
Okay, thank you. Bill, I've tried about 5 times to bring you up and you've finally made it. So do you want to put your camera on and ask your question?
Camera will be a little difficult, I think. But
okay.
No, Tom, marvellous stuff. And I share your enthusiasm, not only for the scenery, but for the actual incredible commitment of the people involved. I visited Asiago and also Corvara.
Yeah.
My question really is, by the time we get to 1918, in June, the 48th Division are there supporting the Italians up on the Altopiano.
Yep.
How is it then that the Italian army is able to send people to the Western Front in France to support operations there?
It's a very good question. It was a deal that Cadorna made. So he found his worst collection of troops possible and sent them to the Western Front.
Okay. I think it's fair to say, as an ex-military bloke, I sort of shared the traditional view of the Italian army as, 1 forward, 5 reverse gears and all that. But when you get up into that area and you see the achievements that they made, and particularly the fact that there were troops brought up from the south of Italy and punched up into the mountains.
Yeah.
It is just an incredible feat of arms, an incredible feat of endurance.
Yeah, I mean, the Italian army, bless them, they weren't half as bad as everybody likes to make out. They were very hard done by their commanders. You know, it was not uncommon for troops to spend up to a year in the front lines without any kind of leave at all, or even going back into reserve position. So that was quite a common thing. And so the Italians, yeah, I mean, you know, troops from southern Italy suddenly presented with 10 feet of snow. You know, it must have been extraordinary for them. And of course, they were a peasant army in many respects as well. So most of them had never seen a motor vehicle before they joined the army. Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. Peter.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Exceptional talk. Extremely well illustrated, obviously. Hopefully, a very simple question. I didn't notice many, if any, photographs of the day of Italian troops, particularly in the higher battlefields up in the mountains, wearing helmets. Have I just missed something, or were they not issued, or were they not used because of whatever reason?
Helmets arrived on the Italian front from the middle of 1916 onwards, and in many instances at high altitude, you don't want a metal thing on your head.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
A, because it's bloody cold. B, lots of people got struck by lightning. So that was quite a common occurrence. And so there was really no great need at very high altitude for a steel helmet. Obviously lower down, absolutely. And places like the Carso later on in the year, you know, they saved tens of thousands of lives by just giving their troops tin helmets. But at high altitude, there was no real need. And it was, make your head cold.
Sure. Thanks very much. Got it.
Thanks, Peter. Brian.
Hiya, Tom. Sorry.
Hi, Brian.
My wife's grandfather was awarded the military medal in 1917 for Isonzo.
Oh, really?
But that wasn't the question. When I was reading some of the old war diaries in Kew Gardens some 2 years ago, I understood from them that the Pope had actually encouraged the Italian army to mutiny at the time.
Ooh, I hadn't heard about that. I know that originally the Pope was a big supporter of the war, which is not really what you expect from a pontiff, but I don't know whether he had encouraged them to mutiny or not. I suspect that that's probably a bit of propaganda of some sort. I don't know.
It was on a report written by a British Army commanding officer.
Right.
He indicated that the Italians had tried to mutiny because the Pope had encouraged them to lay down their arms and not shoot fellow Christians or whatever.
I hadn't heard that version, so worth looking into.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, Brian. I've tried bringing other people up. I'm failing, so I'm going to read one or two out.
Okay.
Kate Thompson, are there any battlefield tours available?
Not that I've ever come across. I jokingly said I was going to set my own one up, but that's not going to happen. But no, there are certain things you can do. There are ski tours of the Dolomites sector. So if you're into your skiing, you can go on a World War I ski tour, which I believe is quite fun. I only use snowshoes. I don't do the skiing thing. And I believe there are some battlefield tours based out of Gorizia, but I've never come across one. I've never seen one advertised. And that's part of the reason I'm writing my book, is that it will be part battlefield guide. That's what I'm going to put practical information into it. But no, to my knowledge, there aren't. So yeah, maybe I should start them.
Okay, next one is Tony Stiles. Tony, I've tried about 5 times to bring you up. He has just messaged me to say he doesn't have a camera. but I still can't bring him up on audio. So he says, even with the benefit of hindsight, fighting on this front seems pointless, more so than the Western Front. So the obvious question is, why? Why not declare a demilitarized zone?
Well, obviously the Allies wanted the Italians to take troops away from the Eastern and Western Front. So by declaring war on Austria, Austria had to defend its borders and it had to take troops from elsewhere in order to do that. I don't know whether at the beginning of the war anyone ever thought anything would come of it. It would just be an annoying sideshow to keep the Austrians occupied. But as I said earlier, Lloyd George was convinced that the Italians and the British, a combined force, and the French, could actually break through and knock Austria out of the war. And with Austria out of the war, Germany's southern border is wide open. So I think there were people later on in the war who thought actually the Italian front makes more sense than the Western Front.
Okay. Stuart Lamb, I've heard there were cases of avalanches being deliberately triggered by the opposing sides using artillery. Was this the case? And if so, how widespread was this tactic?
It was pretty widespread. It did happen. There's a famous occasion on the Col de Lana where 762 Italian mountain troops were swept away by an avalanche that was deliberately caused by Austrian shelling. So they were clambering up a 45-degree slope to Col de Lana. The Austrians dropped 3 artillery shells at the top of the slope. That caused the slope to avalanche. 762 people gone. So yeah, it did happen, not just with snow, but also with rocks as well. They would often try and bring rock falls down onto roads to hamper resupply, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a fairly common tactic.
Okay, a couple of comments about the tours, which was asked a moment ago. Stefan Nussbaum says there are tours organised by the museum in Kobarid, if that's how it's pronounced.
Kobarid, yeah.
Along the Walk of Peace.
Okay, yes.
And Simon Keynes says new scientists are offering a tour, including museums on this front, and he's sent a link.
Oh, okay.
So
that's
new
good.
scientists front. Sorry?
Kobarid is the modern name for Caporetto. There's a really good museum there.
Okay.
So that's a logical place to start a tour for sure. Okay,
and if other people are interested, newscientist.com/tours. Brian Evans, very early question. I've failed to get Brian up either. So many tunnels. Are there any stats about how many meters of tunnel per day and how many people would dig in a digging party?
So difficult to say because there are some stats. There was a scientific paper written on the subject. With 2 teams of 2 men with pneumatic drills, they could usually advance about 2 or 3 meters a day through hard limestone. So, you know, it was a lot of work. When they were tunneling on Col de Lana, that's porphyry, that's volcanic, so that's hard as well. It varied so much in terms of where they were digging, what they were digging through. I mean, there are probably hundreds of miles of rock tunnels throughout this front. They are everywhere.
Okay. One last question. I've had a question, well, not a question. Somebody said, could you put up the further reading, the books that you showed? Is there any chance, just while I'm winding down, you could share your screen with that slide or not?
Yeah.
With those books.
Yeah, those, the White War is kind of the go-to. I personally don't think it's as good as everyone says, but it's a really good intro. There are a couple of rather random chapters in there about poetry and stuff, which I don't really understand, but that's kind of where most people start. The John Schindler one is superb. He's a really excellent historian. He's done a lot of stuff about the Eastern Front, but that only concentrates on the Isonzo, doesn't talk about the rest of it. The John Gooch is a fantastic all-rounder. Thoroughly recommend that. And the Irving Root one it's not in print anymore, but it's still available on Kindle. And I actually think it's one of the more readable ones. It's self-published, but I've struggled to find any significant errors in it, and I actually rather like it as a piece of work. So those are kind of the 4 British ones I recommend. If you're an Italian speaker, or a German speaker, there is a lot of material available. I've got about 250 books on the Italian front, but mostly in Italian and German. I don't speak either, so that's a significant challenge.
Okay, last question. Richard Cooksey, and I'll get the pronunciation wrong here. I've got his name right, I think. Was the front ever near to Lake Bohinj in Slovenia? Because he saw some barbed wire there near the mountain Fogel.
Yeah, that lake was behind the front line, but not that far away. If it's the lake I'm thinking of, it's behind the Montenero Ridge, and you can see it from the top of Montenero and Monte Rosso. So if that's the lake he's talking about, then it's close, but not on the front line, as it were. It's probably about 6 miles behind, something like that.
Brilliant. Okay, if you'd like to stop screen share again, please, Tom.
Yep.
I'd just like everyone, if you could, again, thank Tom by raising the hands. That'd be great. Thank you very much. I don't know if you can see it on your screen, Tom, but...
I can't, but...
No, if you look at the list of attendees, they're flying up. There's hundreds of hands being raised.
Well,
Tom,
thank you, everyone, for your attendance. And I'm so sorry I went on and on. I could literally do a 4-hour talk without any trouble at all.
What are you doing next Monday? Tom, all I can say is thanks. That was marvellous. As I say, the photographs are fantastic. Look forward to the book in due course. But thanks once again for giving us a talk.
Absolute pleasure. If any of you are on social media, then you can find me on Twitter, where I bombard everyone with endless stuff about the Italian front. So please do join me if you want to. And I promise that all the comments that got sent through that I haven't mentioned will get passed on to Tom on email tomorrow. Okay, so that's it for tonight. Thanks once again, Tom. I'll email you tomorrow. But thank you and good night to everybody. Been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone. All right. Cheers. Thanks, Tom. Cheers, bye. Bye-bye now. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous. Mademoiselle from Armentières, parlez-vous.